In a world that often judges based on appearances, some moments stand out as powerful reminders of how quickly we make assumptions about others. In an upscale restaurant, where luxury drips from every chandelier, and the smell of gourmet food fills the air, a man walks in wearing nothing more than a simple gray t-shirt, sweatpants, and worn-out sneakers. His presence, seemingly out of place, creates an unexpected ripple in the room, and in the course of the evening, he will prove that appearances, while powerful, do not determine one's worth. This story centers around a powerful lesson in humility, respect, and the importance of understanding that we cannot truly judge a person based on what they wear, how they look, or the first impression they give. This is not a story about what meets the eye, but rather about what lies beneath the surface, a lesson in how we treat others, especially those who might seem out of place. It's a high-end restaurant in the heart of the city, set against a backdrop of luxury cars, well-dressed patrons, and an ambience that radiates elegance. The white tablecloths are impeccably arranged. The sparkling chandeliers cast soft, golden light over everything, and the air smells faintly of fine wine and exquisite cuisine. The guests speak in hushed tones, and the atmosphere is thick with exclusivity. For anyone familiar with the place, it's an unspoken rule: to dine here, you need more than just an appetite. You need to blend in, to fit the mold, and perhaps to make a statement with your attire. People here don't just come for the food, they come for the experience. They come for the luxury. They come to be seen. However, on this particular evening, someone is about to break this unwritten rule. David Lin is not your typical customer at this restaurant, standing just under 6 feet tall. He doesn't have the imposing presence of a celebrity, but what makes him stand out is the total disregard for the rules he is about to display. David, a successful tech entrepreneur and the co-founder of a rising tech company, is dressed in nothing more than a simple gray t-shirt, a pair of sweatpants, and old sneakers, clothes you might find in a young professional's weekend wardrobe, but certainly not something you would expect in a place that thrives on the elegance of its customers. As David walks through the restaurant's glass doors, his presence becomes instantly apparent. The hush falls over the room, not because of any visible grandeur, but because of the dissonance between his attire and the setting. Some heads turn, a few murmurs rise from the crowd, and the energy in the room shifts from the usual calm to a mix of curiosity and judgment. To most of the diners, David is clearly out of place and oddity among the perfectly polished. His attire, while perfectly comfortable for any other setting, is the exact opposite of the carefully curated look of those around him. The moment David steps inside, the reaction from the other patrons is swift. Some try to hide their disapproval behind polite glances, while others can't help but stare. They might not know it yet, but the evening is about to become more than just another night of fine dining. It's about to become a powerful social experiment in how we judge people based on nothing more than their outward appearance. But David, ever unbothered, seems entirely unfazed by the stares. He walks confidently, his gaze steady as he scans the room. He knows exactly where he's headed. The reservation he made is for a table by the window, where he can enjoy his meal in peace. Despite the glances and murmurs, he remains calm and focused. To David, this is just another restaurant. To others, it's a high-end social arena where looking the part is as important as anything else. David knows what it's like to be judged, and he's learned, over the years, that how others see you says more about them than it ever will about you. Enter Emmer, the waitress. Emmer is a seasoned professional, having worked at this restaurant for years. She prides herself on knowing exactly who belongs in the establishment and who does not. In her mind, she's the gatekeeper of the restaurant's image, and she's not afraid to show it. When Emma lays eyes on David, her reaction is swift and judgmental. She can't believe he's actually here, this man in his sweatpants and sneakers. To her, David is nothing more than a man who doesn't belong. She's worked in the service industry for years, and she has seen all kinds of people. But David's casual attire immediately marks him as someone who doesn't understand the rules of high society. Without hesitation, Emma approaches him with a question that's laced with mockery. "Are you sure you want to eat here?" The tone in Emma's voice is condescending, as if she's offering David a chance to back out, a way for him to avoid embarrassment. She doesn't even try to hide her distaste for his appearance. In a place like this, people are expected to conform to a certain standard, and David's relaxed, easygoing look just doesn't cut it. David, however, doesn't flinch. He doesn't rise to the bait. Instead, he simply smiles politely, and with a calmness that might be seen as surprising. He says, "Yes, I'm sure. I'll be fine here." His composure is immediately striking, and while Emma's condescension remains in her posture, David's response quietly sets the tone for what is to come. At this point, it becomes clear that the power in this encounter doesn't lie with Emma. Even though she is the one who controls the service, the true strength in the room rests with David. His lack of reaction to Emma's insults speaks volumes. He doesn't need to prove anything, especially to someone who has already made up her mind about him based on his clothes. This is where the dynamic shifts. As David remains silent, Emma begins to feel an uncomfortable shift in the energy around her. It's as though the room is holding its breath, waiting for David to react. He doesn't. His silence and calmness are louder than any words he could say. As David settles into his seat, Emma reluctantly walks away, but not without casting a final, disapproving glance in his direction. The air feels heavy, and the buzz around David's rival intensifies. The patrons continue to murmur under their breaths, whispering about the man in casual clothes, wondering who he might be or why he dared to enter a fine dining establishment dressed in such a manner. Their eyes follow him, and while some try to mask their judgment with polite smiles, it's clear that David's presence has disrupted the usually calm and exclusive atmosphere of the restaurant. David, however, remains undisturbed as he places his napkin on his lap and looks at the menu. His focus is on what truly matters, enjoying his meal. But Emma's judgment isn't over. She's already decided to make this more than just an encounter between customer and server. For her, David represents a breach of decorum, an affront to the standards she believes are set in stone at the restaurant. Emma returns to David's table shortly after, carrying a glass of water and a menu. As she places the water down in front of him, she can't resist making a subtle jab. "I'm sure you'll find the wine list overwhelming," she says with a thin smile, her words carrying a tone that suggests David isn't someone who would appreciate the finer things. David looks up at her, his face serene, unbothered by her veiled insult. He simply responds with a polite nod, saying, "I'm sure I'll find something that suits me." His calmness catches her off guard, as if she were expecting him to snap or show some sign of discomfort. Instead, David's composure and humility only serve to highlight the absurdity of her attitude. She tries again, pushing further by commenting on the menu prices. "Are you sure you want to spend so much on the tasting menu? It's quite expensive for someone dressed like, well, you," she trails off, her voice dripping with sarcasm. It's a move she's used before to provoke customers she deems unworthy, a tactic she believes will force them into submission. But David does not rise to her bait. He doesn't flinch, doesn't fluster. Instead, he quietly chooses his meal without acknowledging her remarks. There is a quiet power in his silence. It's almost as if he is impervious to her attempts to embarrass him. As he places his order, his calmness in the face of her continued rudeness only serves to frustrate Emma more. She expects him to react, to become self-conscious, or perhaps even apologize for his appearance. But David does nothing. He simply continues to be himself, unfazed, self-assured, and respectful, not only of her, but of the experience in front of him. As the evening continues, the rest of the restaurant begins to take notice. David's lack of reaction to Emma's increasingly hostile treatment becomes a point of fascination. His ability to remain composed, despite the subtle jabs and the obvious discomfort in the room, makes him an object of intrigue. Some of the other diners, including an older couple at a nearby table, begin to exchange glances. They notice the clear imbalance in the way Emma is treating David compared to the rest of the guests, and the judgment they once shared begins to shift. They start to wonder why David is still calm, why he doesn't seem to care about the inappropriate treatment he's receiving. It's clear to them that something deeper is going on, but they are unsure what exactly. As Emma continues to make snide remarks about his choice of dishes and the prices, David simply remains poised. His demeanor is almost regal in its serenity, a quiet confidence that contrasts sharply with the tension in the air. The older couple, Mr. and Mrs. Carter, who have dined at this restaurant for years, exchange silent glances. They know Emma's typical behavior, and they know how the restaurant's patrons usually react to being treated poorly. But David is different. He's not reacting in the way they expect, and that, in itself, begins to make a statement, one that Emma fails to understand. As the night wears on, Emma grows more visibly frustrated. She has tried everything she knows to provoke David into a reaction, mocking his choice of wine, pointing out the extravagance of the meal, even suggesting that he would be better suited for a lesser establishment. But David's indifference to her taunts only makes her more agitated. She's not used to this. In her experience, when customers like David are treated poorly, they often get embarrassed, angry, or uncomfortable. They begin to question their worthiness and, more often than not, leave before the evening is over. But David does none of these things. He continues to smile, to be polite, and most importantly, he remains in control of the situation. David's quiet strength is something Emma can't comprehend. She's used to the power dynamics of high society, where the wealth and appearance of someone often dictate their treatment. To her, David's presence in this restaurant, dressed so casually, is an insult to the rules of the establishment. But the more she tries to provoke him, the more it becomes clear that the true power lies in David's ability to stay calm, composed, and, most importantly, humble. Just as Emma reaches the peak of her frustration, she's interrupted by a presence. The restaurant manager, Mr. Thompson, walks over to David's table with a warm smile on his face. His approach is filled with respect, and his demeanor contrasts sharply with Emma's coldness. As he greets David, Emma watches in stunned silence. Mr. Lin, Mr. Thompson says with a deep sense of admiration, "It's a true honor to have you here tonight. We're so grateful to have you as a guest." Emma's face goes pale. The moment Mr. Thompson speaks, she realizes who David truly is. The calmness, the polite interactions, it all makes sense now. David Lin is not just any ordinary customer. He's a co-owner of the restaurant, and he's someone whose influence extends far beyond the confines of this building. Emma is left in shock as Mr. Thompson's words hang in the air. The room falls silent, and the once disruptive buzz of gossip dies down. The other diners, including Mr. and Mrs. Carter, now understand the true significance of David's presence. He is not just a guest. He is a man whose worth is defined by much more than his attire. He's a man who has earned his place here not through appearance, but through integrity, success, and the respect he commands. David remains calm throughout the exchange. His gentle smile never wavers as he listens to Mr. Thompson speak. Emma, on the other hand, begins to squirm in her seat, realizing that her rude behavior has just backfired spectacularly. The truth is out. The man she had so eagerly judged is far from what she had assumed, and now she must face the consequences of her actions. As the truth about David's identity becomes known to everyone in the restaurant, a deep silence falls over the room. The kind of silence that is not uncomfortable, but rather reflective, as if the entire dining room is collectively processing what has just occurred. The din of murmurs fades, and all eyes are now on David Lin. The patrons who had earlier been whispering, speculating about his place in the room, now understand that they had been wrong all along. Emma stands frozen, her face flushed with embarrassment. She had made a critical mistake, assuming that David, just because of his attire, did not belong. She had judged him based on a simple assumption, one that was entirely wrong. And in doing so, she had not only embarrassed herself, but also misjudged someone who was far more influential than she could have imagined. David, however, remains completely unbothered. His calm demeanor has never faltered, and he doesn't allow this moment to become a spectacle. He doesn't need to make anyone feel guilty for their behavior. He doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. Instead, he continues to be the man he was when he first entered the restaurant. Composed, humble, and respectful. It's this very contrast between David's behavior and Emma's that begins to make the lesson crystal clear. While Emma's arrogance and assumptions have caused discomfort and tension, David's unshakable calmness has now turned the situation into a moment of reflection. Everyone in the room, whether they realize it or not, has just witnessed a subtle yet powerful lesson in humility and respect. As David and Mr. Thompson continue their conversation, the restaurant manager's tone is one of utmost respect, acknowledging David not only as a valued guest, but also as a partner and co-owner of the establishment. And the respect David receives from Mr. Thompson is not out of obligation, but genuine admiration, built over years of trust and mutual understanding. David remains humble in his response, never once flaunting his status. His words are measured and kind, as he continues to engage with Mr. Thompson about the restaurant's operations and his appreciation for the staff. David's behavior demonstrates that true power comes from being grounded, showing respect to others regardless of their station in life. From where Emma stands, it's almost as if David's presence has become a beacon of everything she has been missing in her own interactions. She realizes, albeit too late, that her role in this high-end establishment was never to look down on people or assume that one's worth can be determined by their appearance. Her role was to serve with humility, regardless of the attire or social standing of the person sitting at the table. The entire room is now keenly aware of the transformation that's taking place. The diners who had once been critical of David are now beginning to reconsider their judgments. What had initially seemed like an uncomfortable encounter has, in fact, turned into a powerful display of integrity. David's actions speak louder than any words could. As Emma watches the respect David commands without even asking for it, she begins to internalize the lesson. It's a difficult pill to swallow, but the truth is undeniable. She had been wrong. She had assumed that the way David looked determined his place in the world, and she had judged him unfairly because of it. And in doing so, she had failed to recognize that her role as a servant in the restaurant was to respect all customers no matter their attire, appearance, or background. Emma steps away from David's table, a flood of emotions rushing over her. She's embarrassed, yes, but she's also deeply reflective. She knows that this encounter has changed her both personally and professionally. She can no longer view the people she serves through the lens of her own assumptions or prejudices. She now understands that respect isn't something earned based on appearance or status. It is something that should be given freely to everyone, regardless of how they look or what they wear. David's unspoken lesson is profound. True respect comes from within, and it isn't about conforming to external standards, but recognizing the inherent worth of every person. And while Emma may have been blinded by her own biases, this experience will serve as a reminder to her moving forward. She will never again let her judgments cloud her interactions with others. The older couple, Mr. and Mrs. Carter, who had been quietly observing the situation, are now visibly moved by what they've witnessed. They exchange glances, nodding in silent agreement. To them, this is more than just a simple dining experience. It's a reminder of what it means to be human. In a world where it's easy to judge others by what they wear or how they speak, the couple now sees the deeper lesson that has unfolded before them. They smile at each other, understanding that sometimes the greatest lessons come not from books or speeches, but from everyday moments like these. It's a reminder that we all have value, and we should treat everyone with kindness and respect, no matter their outward appearance. As the evening winds down, the tone in the restaurant shifts. The initial judgment and discomfort have dissipated, replaced by a quiet understanding that everyone, regardless of their status or outward appearance, deserves respect. David's lesson is felt by all, whether they realize it or not. As David finishes his meal, he stands up to leave, but not before giving Emma a kind smile. There's no anger in his expression, just a calm understanding that sometimes people need to learn things the hard way. Emma, for her part, can only nod back, realizing that this brief encounter has forever changed the way she will view her work and her role in the world. David walks out of the restaurant, leaving behind a group of diners and staff who are quietly reflecting on the lessons of the evening. His departure is as understated as his arrival, but the impact of his presence lingers long after he's gone. David's time in the restaurant wasn't about teaching anyone a lesson, it was about showing everyone that respect is not something to be reserved for a select few based on their outward appearance. True respect is about recognizing the inherent worth of every individual, regardless of their station in life. As the staff cleans up the restaurant and the diners make their way to the exit, they do so with a sense of quiet reflection. They understand now that they've witnessed something far more significant than just an interaction between a customer and a waitress. They've witnessed a moment that will stick with them, a moment that challenged their perceptions of who is worthy of respect and who is not. After David leaves the restaurant, the atmosphere remains unexpectedly calm. It's as if the air itself has been clear of the tension that had built up earlier in the evening. Emma stands in the back of the restaurant, staring at the empty seat where David had been. Her mind is racing, replaying the events of the night over and over again. She had been so certain of her judgment, so certain that the man in front of her didn't belong in the world of fine dining. Now, as she stands there, she realizes just how wrong she was. The sense of guilt that weighs on her shoulders is heavy, but it's mixed with something else, a newfound understanding. In her years of working in the service industry, she had always believed that appearance was the most important thing. She had judged people based on what they wore, how they spoke, and the confidence they exuded. But tonight, she had learned a hard lesson. True worth is never determined by appearance. It's determined by character, humility, and the way we treat others. For the first time, Emma begins to question her own actions, not just in her interactions with David, but in the way she had treated countless other patrons in the past. Had she been dismissive of others because they didn't fit the mold? Had she judged people by their clothing, their accent, or the way they carried themselves? The thought is unsettling, but it's also the beginning of a change. Later that night, Emma finds herself standing in front of Mr. Thompson, the restaurant manager, who had witnessed the entire exchange between her and David. She feels a mix of anxiety and regret, unsure of how to address what happened. But Mr. Thompson, ever the professional, doesn't make her feel worse. Instead, he offers her a chance to reflect on the situation. "Emma," he says softly, "you've been with us for a long time, and I know you take pride in your work. But tonight, I saw something different. I saw you struggle with something you've likely never had to confront before." Emma swallows hard, her voice shaking slightly as she replies, I don't know what came over me. I saw David, and I immediately assumed he didn't belong here. I thought I was protecting the restaurant's image. But now, I see how wrong I was." Mr. Thompson nods. "It's not an easy lesson to learn, but you've learned it, and that's what matters. The most important thing we do here isn't just serve food. It's about making people feel welcome, no matter who they are or how they look." Emma feels a weight lift off her chest, but there's still a lingering sense of discomfort. She knows that she'll have to work harder to undo the biases she had allowed to shape her actions. This realization is painful, but it's also necessary. She can no longer ignore the importance of treating everyone with the same level of respect, no matter their appearance or their status. While Emma is grappling with her emotions, the older couple, Mr. and Mrs. Carter, have already left the restaurant. They, too, have been affected by the events of the evening, though perhaps not in the same way Emma has been. As they walk to their car, they discuss what they witnessed in quiet voices, a deep reflection in their words. "I never thought of it that way," Mr. Carter says, adjusting his coat as they walk. "It's easy to judge people when they don't fit the mold. But David showed us something different." Mrs. Carter nods thoughtfully. "It's not about what someone wears or how they look. It's about who they are, how they treat others." I think we all needed to be reminded of that. The couple drives home in silence, their minds lingering on the lessons of the night. They had been silently judging David when he walked in, just like many others. They had assumed he wasn't part of the exclusive world they inhabited, but now they see how wrong they were. The judgment they had passed without thinking has been replaced by a sense of humility and respect for David and, more importantly, for the lesson he had unknowingly taught them. As the night winds down, the last few diners finish their meals, and the staff begins to clear the tables. Emma, still deep in thought, moves about the restaurant with a sense of purpose. She's no longer focused on the superficial aspects of the job. Instead, she's concentrating on providing the best service possible, treating each person with the same level of care and respect that she had failed to offer David earlier. David's presence may have left the building, but the lesson he imparted remains. It lingers in the minds of those who were witnesses to the events of the evening, including Emma, Mr. and Mrs. Carter, and the rest of the staff. The restaurant that had once been a place where only the worthy were treated with respect is now a space that embodies inclusivity, understanding, and empathy. The judgmental attitudes that had existed before have been replaced with a more welcoming and understanding atmosphere. The next day, Emma wakes up with a sense of resolve. She spends the entire morning reflecting on her actions and how she can be better. She doesn't want to be the person she was before, a person who judged others based on what they wore, a person who assumed someone didn't belong simply because they didn't fit the mold. At work that evening, as she serves her first table, she makes a conscious effort to be present, to engage with each customer with genuine warmth and respect. She's determined to make sure no one is ever made to feel the way David was on that night. And though it's a difficult process, she knows it's the right one. Over time, Emma grows in her role. She becomes more compassionate, not just in her interactions with customers, but with her coworkers as well. She begins to understand that respect is not a commodity to be earned. It is a fundamental right that should be granted to everyone, regardless of their background, their appearance, or their status. As the weeks go by, the lesson of that night sticks with the staff, the diners, and even Emma herself. David Lynn may have left the restaurant the evening with little more than a kind smile and a quiet demeanor, but his presence had made an indelible mark. He didn't need to teach anyone a lesson. He simply lived it. In a world that often values appearances over substance, David showed everyone that true worth is determined not by how we look, but by how we treat others. His quiet strength became a powerful reminder that no one should be judged based on the way they appear. Instead, we should always look deeper, always strive to see the person inside, and always treat others with the respect and dignity they deserve. Weeks have passed since the night David Lynn dined at the Upscale restaurant, but the events of that evening continue to echo through the lives of those who were there. For Emma, the waitress who had initially judged David based on his appearance, the transformation has been profound. No longer is she the person who casually dismisses others based on their clothes, accent, or background. She's learned that her judgments, however fleeting, can have lasting effects, and she's committed to changing her ways. Emma spends her days now reflecting on her interactions with people, always striving to treat everyone with the same level of respect, regardless of their outward appearance. She takes extra time with customers, ensuring they feel valued and welcome. The shift in her mindset is palpable. The way she carries herself, the kindness in her actions, and the way she handles even the most difficult customers have all changed. Emma is no longer just going through the motions. She is engaged, actively listening, and making an effort to understand the people she serves. And the results are evident. Not only does she receive more positive feedback from patrons, but her coworkers also begin to notice the change. there is a newfound warmth in the restaurant, a sense of respect that permeates every interaction, both with customers and colleagues. One evening, as Emma closes the restaurant and prepares to leave, she finds herself alone in the break room. She looks at her reflection in the mirror and smiles. It's a smile of contentment, a smile that says she's proud of how far she's come. She's learned that respect cannot be demanded from others, it must first be earned by offering it to everyone, without exception. For the first time in a long while, Emma realizes that she's found a new sense of purpose in her work. She no longer sees her job simply as a means to an end. It's become a way for her to connect with people, to learn from them, and to give back the kindness and respect that she had previously withheld from those who seemed out of place. David's simple yet powerful example continues to guide her. His silent strength and unspoken lesson have changed the way she views the world and, more importantly, the way she views herself. No longer does she feel the need to prove herself to others or to validate her worth based on outward appearances. She understands now that the value of a person is not determined by what they wear or how they look, but by the content of their character and the kindness they show to others. The changes in Emma are just the beginning. The restaurant itself has also undergone a shift. The atmosphere is no longer one of exclusivity defined by appearance, but one of warmth and inclusivity. The staff, inspired by Emma's transformation, begin to treat every customer with the same level of respect, no matter their attire or background. This shift in mindset is not just about making people feel comfortable, it's about recognizing the humanity in every individual. And as the patrons begin to feel this change, they, too, start to interact differently with one another. No longer do they hold judgments based on surface-level observations. Instead, they start engaging in deeper conversations, getting to know the people around them without preconceived notions. Even Mr. Thompson, the restaurant manager, has noticed the difference. He sees the staff working together with a renewed sense of purpose, treating every customer as though they are equally important. And though the restaurant's reputation for luxury remains intact, it is now coupled with a sense of community and respect that wasn't there before. David Lin's presence at the restaurant that evening, though brief, had a profound effect on everyone in the room. His quiet demeanor, his refusal to react to judgment, and his unshakable humility became a lesson that everyone needed to learn. But it wasn't just about David's identity as a co-owner of the restaurant, it was about the way he carried himself. He didn't need to flaunt his wealth, status, or influence. He showed that true power lies in humility and treating others with respect regardless of their station in life. For the other diners, especially Mr. and Mrs. Carter, the lesson was equally powerful. They had spent much of their lives judging others based on their appearance, but after witnessing the events unfold, they realized how wrong they had been. They, too, started to challenge their own biases, questioning the way they had looked at people in the past. They began to realize that true connection comes not from superficial judgments, but from seeing the value in others as human beings. The couple, like Emma, started to look at the world with a new lens, one that focused on kindness, understanding, and empathy. They understood now that no one should ever be made to feel inferior because of the way they look or what they wear. As David's story continues to ripple through the lives of those who witnessed it, the final lesson becomes clear. Appearances can be deceiving, but kindness, respect, and humility are the qualities that truly define a person. David did not need to prove his worth to anyone. He simply lived it through his actions. His unspoken lesson was one that transcended the boundaries of the restaurant. It was a lesson that would resonate in the hearts and minds of everyone who had the privilege of witnessing that night. In a world where judgment is often passed based on superficial characteristics, David Lin's quiet strength serves as a reminder that the most important thing we can do is treat others with dignity, regardless of what they wear or where they come from. True character is not measured by appearances, but by how we treat others, especially those who may seem different from ourselves. Months later, Emma finds herself facing new challenges that test her growth and the lessons she has learned. But now, instead of reacting with defensiveness or judgment, she approaches each situation with patience, understanding, and respect. She knows that her work is far from over, but she is determined to continue evolving. She is no longer defined by the biases that once clouded her judgment. Instead, she is now defined by her capacity to show respect and kindness to everyone she encounters, regardless of their background. Emma may have started her journey in a high-end restaurant, surrounded by luxury and judgment, but she has found something far more valuable: the understanding that true wealth lies not in material POS, sessions, or outward appearances, but in the way we treat one another. As Emma locks the doors of the restaurant for the night, she reflects on how far she has come. She thinks of David Lin and the quiet, powerful lesson he taught her. She realizes that every day is an opportunity to practice respect, kindness, and humility, and with each passing day, she becomes more committed to living her life according to these principles. The world may continue to judge based on appearances, but Emma knows that her actions, guided by the lessons learned from that one evening, will always speak louder than any judgment ever could. In this final part, we witness the lasting transformation that David's actions had on Emma, the other patrons, and the restaurant as a whole. Emma embraces her newfound understanding of respect and humility, and the restaurant begins to reflect these values in its operations. The lesson that true worth is not determined by outward appearances, but by one's character and actions resonates deeply with everyone involved.